At my husband's funeral, a stranger whispered he wasn't really dead. My son and daughter-in-law had rushed the arrangements, their faces betraying not grief, but fear and anger. It felt like my world was ending, but a mother's instinct, sharp and undeniable, told me he spoke the truth. This is my story, raw and unbelievable. Listen until the end. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. 2 weeks. It had only been 2 weeks since Arthur's sudden collapse, and here I was, Eleanor, 68 years old, standing at the edge of his open grave at Riverside Cemetery. The biting March wind whipped through the branches of skeletal oaks, mirroring the icy grip around my own heart. Grief was a suffocating blanket, but beneath it, a prickling sensation of wrongness had festered since the moment the paramedics had declared him gone. My Arthur, my husband of 45 years, lay still within the polished mahogany casket. He looked peaceful, almost serene, as if merely asleep, but the silence that radiated from him was absolute, the kind that screamed finality, yet refused to quiet the insistent whisper in my mind. A sudden heart attack, they said. A swift, painless end. But Arthur had always been so robust, so full of life, even at 70. This sudden, inexplicable demise felt like a tear in the fabric of our existence, too jagged to be natural. My son, David, 42, stood rigidly beside me, his hand a cold weight on my arm. His wife, Chloe, hovered on my other side, a picture of perfectly poised condolence in her expensive black suit. They had been too helpful with all the arrangements, as Chloe had put it, her syrupy voice sweetening every bitter pill. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mama Eleanor," she'd chirped, taking over everything from the eulogy choices to the floral arrangements. It had felt like a relief at first, a kind of benevolent hijacking of my duties. But as the days wore on, it began to feel less like help and more like control. I kept catching David glancing at his phone, a quick, furtive check of the screen, even during moments of supposed solemnity. His brow would furrow slightly, a shadow of preoccupation on his face that had nothing to do with mourning. Chloe, on the other hand, was unnervingly composed. Her grief seemed to be worn like a meticulously chosen accessory, perfect in its presentation, yet lacking the raw, unbridled agony I felt. Not once had I seen a tear truly distort her flawless makeup, nor had her voice cracked with genuine sorrow. It was a performance, polished and chillingly effective, and it only added to the growing unease within me. As the small gathering made its way towards the gravesite, my eyes drifted. Near the ornate wrought iron entrance of the cemetery, a lone figure stood apart from the discreetly parked cars and hushed mourners. He was a disheveled man, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, his clothes rumpled, his hair a mess of gray streaks. He looked weathered, like someone who had spent too much time outdoors, but it was his eyes that held me. They were startlingly alert, intelligent, and fixed with an intense, unwavering focus on me. A shiver traced its way down my spine, not of fear, but of an inexplicable recognition, as if I had been waiting for him. David tightened his grip on my arm, attempting to gently usher me towards my appointed seat beside the grave. "Mama, please, let's sit." The pastor is about to begin, but my gaze remained locked with the stranger's, a silent, magnetic pull drawing me towards him, away from the neatly arranged rows of black-clad figures. The pastor's voice was a low hum, delivering a eulogy filled with anecdotes about Arthur's kindness and wisdom. He spoke of fishing trips and shared laughter, of Arthur's steady hand and generous spirit. Each word was meant to bring comfort, but my thoughts kept drifting, not to memories of Arthur, but to the man on the periphery. He hadn't moved. He was still watching. A silent sentinel whose presence was becoming more real to me than the familiar faces of my supposed loved ones. As the pastor finally concluded his sermon, uttering the final words of benediction, the weathered man began to move. He walked with a determined stride, cutting across the manicured lawn directly towards me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a premonition, cold and stark. He stopped just a few feet away, his startling blue eyes locking with mine once more. His voice, when it came, was rough, gravelly, yet surprisingly educated, speaking quietly, but urgently enough for me to hear over the rustling leaves. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something urgent." Before I could even respond, David stepped forward, his body rigid, interposing himself between us. "Excuse me, sir. This is a private family matter. You need to leave." He shot a quick, imperious glance towards a security guard standing discreetly by a hearse, signaling him over. But the stranger ignored David completely, his gaze piercing mine, a desperate urgency in his eyes. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice further, a whisper meant only for me. "Your husband," he breathed, the words barely audible above the wind. "He's not dead." My world didn't just tilt. It spun violently off its axis, shattering into a million icy fragments. The ground seemed to drop away beneath my feet, my knees buckling. David grabbed my arm, steadying me, but his grip felt alien, unwelcome. The man, now ignoring David's insistent shoves, pressed on, his words tumbling out with a frantic energy. "My name is Dr. Silas Blackwood. I'm a toxicologist. Arthur's symptoms, the sudden onset, the lack of struggle, they point directly to tetrodotoxin. It's a neurotoxin, ma'am. It perfectly mimics death, undetectable in standard postmortem tests. He's alive, but he's running out of oxygen, rapidly." Chloe, who had been observing with a stony face, suddenly erupted. "You're insane! Arthur is dead! We all saw it happen!" Her voice was sharp, a high-pitched hiss of disbelief. But beneath her carefully constructed outrage, I saw a fleeting flicker of pure, unadulterated fear in her perfectly composed features. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual placid mask. But I had seen it. I tore my gaze from Silas, my mind reeling, and looked at David. His face, usually so open and familiar, was a mask of confusion and anger. But it wasn't the kind of anger one would show towards a deranged stranger interrupting a funeral. No, this was a panic, barely concealed, a raw, primal fury that spoke volumes. He wasn't shocked by Silas's claim. He was enraged that it had been spoken aloud. In that chilling realization, an instinct deep within me ignited, burning away the fog of grief and disbelief. It screamed, loud and clear, that Silas was telling the truth. "Why?" Silas Blackwood continued, his voice low but insistent, even as security guards approached. "Did they insist on a closed casket viewing? Why the rush to bury him? And most importantly, Mrs. Vance, who truly stands to gain from Arthur's death?" His words were like daggers, each one striking a vulnerable spot in the wall of my grief, tearing open old wounds and exposing raw nerves. He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, his gaze softened, a deep, sorrowful understanding filling his blue eyes. "I know this sounds unbelievable, but I wouldn't be here if I hadn't lived through it. I lost my wife, Sarah, and my daughter, Emma, years ago. The doctors said it was an unknown viral infection, but I knew, deep down, something was wrong. It wasn't until years later, when I dedicated my life to toxicology research, that I discovered the truth. They were poisoned by the exact same undetectable toxin." His voice trembled slightly with the weight of his past tragedy, a shared pain that resonated with the monstrous doubt, now gripping my heart. "I recognized the symptoms from the local newspaper report of your husband's passing. The swiftness, the apparent heart attack, the lack of an autopsy. It screamed familiar. I had to intervene." David, his face contorted with rage, finally found his voice. "Get this lunatic out of here. He's disturbing my mother, desecrating my father's memory." He gestured wildly at the security guards, his eyes blazing with a fury that felt disproportionate, almost frantic. The seed of monstrous doubt, however, had already been firmly planted in my mind, its roots digging deep, twisting around every unresolved question. I watched Chloe, her hand now a vice-like grip on David's arm, her perfectly sculpted face a mask of indignation, her possessive hold, their coordinated efforts to control every single detail of Arthur's funeral, from the choice of hymns to the guest list, and especially their unwavering insistence on keeping me away from Arthur's body in the days leading up to the funeral. All began to replay in my mind, imbued with a sinister new meaning. Chloe had always been the one to manage things, to organize, to streamline, but now it felt less like efficiency and more like a deliberate act of obfuscation. "Is it true?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the rising wind and David's increasingly agitated commands to the security guards. I wasn't speaking to Silas anymore, but to David and Chloe, my eyes pleading for a denial, a comforting reassurance that this man was truly insane. They exchanged a fleeting, silent look, a fraction of a second that lasted an eternity, a flicker of panic in David's eyes, a tightening of Chloe's jaw. It wasn't confusion I saw, nor shock, but something far more chilling: recognition. And in that silent exchange, my darkest fear was confirmed. My husband might be alive, buried by our own son. As security guards, now moving with greater urgency, began to lead Silas away, he managed one last, furtive action. His hand brushed mine, pressing a crumpled piece of paper into my palm. It was a swift, almost imperceptible movement, hidden from David and Chloe by the broad shoulders of the guards. His eyes met mine one last time, a desperate plea for me to trust him. Then he was gone, escorted towards the cemetery gates. The rest of the funeral was a blur. The dirt thudding onto Arthur's casket, the final prayers, the condolences offered by well-meaning friends and distant relatives. I moved through it all like a ghost, my mind numb, my fingers clutching the folded paper, a secret that burned against my skin. In the limousine, on the ride back to our house, Chloe leaned forward and spoke to the driver, her voice a low, solicitous tone. "Eleanor has been through so much, you know. Poor dear. She's been saying some rather strange things lately, with the grief and all. Just something to keep in mind." She caught my eye in the rearview mirror, a saccharine smile on her lips, but her eyes held a warning. She was subtly planting seeds, laying the groundwork, isolating me even further. Back in the home Arthur and I had shared for 37 years, the familiar suddenly felt foreign. The scent of his pipe tobacco was absent, the reassuring clutter of his books gone. Our family photos, once vibrant reminders of shared joy, now seemed like a museum exhibit. Relics of a life that had been abruptly, unnaturally severed. I retreated to the sanctuary of the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I unfolded Silas's note. Scrawled in a hasty, almost illegible hand were an address and a phone number. Beneath them, 2 stark sentences. "Call me when you're alone. Arthur is running out of time." The words sent a jolt of icy terror through me, but they also galvanized me. My mind, which had been foggy with grief, began to clear with terrifying speed. Memories, previously dismissed as insignificant, now resurfaced with stark clarity. Chloe's insistence on being present during the paramedics' initial examination, practically elbowing me away from Arthur's side. Her incessant chatter, distracting me from the grim reality, and a strange, sweet, medicinal smell that had clung to Arthur's body, which I had vaguely attributed to a new perfume she was wearing. It hadn't smelled like him at all. Then there was the money. David and Chloe had repeatedly, almost obsessively, mentioned Arthur's estate, the nearly $800,000 he had in investments and savings. David had even offered, with feigned concern, to help me manage my finances, suggesting I give him power of attorney. "It would just make things simpler, Mama," he'd said, his smile too wide. And their insistence that I move in with them that very night. "You shouldn't be alone, Mama," Chloe had purred. "We need to start going through Dad's things anyway. It'll be so much easier if you're with us." But I had seen through their thinly veiled concern. It wasn't about comforting me. It was about isolating me, controlling me, gaining unfettered access to Arthur's papers, to his life, to his estate. "No," I had said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I will not leave my home. Arthur's papers are here. And I need my solitude. I needed the walls of our home around me, a tangible connection to the man I loved, a shield against their insidious intentions." Finally, mercifully, they left, promising to return the next morning. The sound of their car pulling out of the driveway was the sweetest music I had heard in weeks. The moment the silence settled, profound and absolute, I pulled out my old flip phone. My hands shaking, I dialed the number Silas had given me, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. The phone rang twice before a cautious voice answered. "Hello?" It was Silas. "It's Eleanor Vance," I whispered, my voice hoarse, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Are you safe? Are you alone?" He asked, his voice low and urgent. The questions, simple as they were, sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine, solidifying the terrifying reality of my situation. I glanced around the quiet living room, the shadows lengthening as dusk settled. Alone. For now, yes, I managed, clutching the phone tighter. I walked over to Arthur's favorite armchair, a worn leather relic that still bore the faint scent of his pipe tobacco and old books. I sank into its comforting depths, needing the illusion of his presence, his strength. "Tell me everything, Dr. Blackwood." He began his harrowing story, his voice a steady drone that belied the horror of his words. "My name is Dr. Silas Blackwood. I used to be a chemical engineer, with a good life, an idyllic life, one might say, with my wife, Sarah, and our little girl, Emma. Emma was 7, full of life, always drawing pictures for her mama." He paused, a momentary catch in his voice, before regaining his composure. "Then Sarah inherited $2 million. A distant aunt, a stroke of unexpected luck, we thought." He continued, painting a picture of domestic bliss that quickly curdled into a nightmare. Sarah's brother, Michael, had always been trouble. Gambling debts, then drugs. He saw that money as his salvation. He convinced Sarah to invest it in some dubious scheme of his. When she started pressing for documentation, for proof of where her money was going, he silenced them both. Silas's voice hardened, laced with a bitterness that decades hadn't dulled. Tetrodotoxin. The same poison he used on them. My breath hitched in my throat. Tetrodotoxin? I repeated, the word alien and terrifying. Yes. It's a neurotoxin, primarily found in pufferfish and some other marine animals and amphibians. What makes it so insidious is how it works. It doesn't kill you immediately. It causes a profound, rapid paralysis. Your heart slows to an almost undetectable beat. Your breathing becomes minimal, shallow gasps. Your body temperature drops. To any casual observer, and even to most medical professionals without specialized equipment or knowledge, you appear dead. Your eyes become fixed, pupils dilated. Rigor mortis can even set in quickly. But here's the cruelest part. Eleanor, your mind, your consciousness, remains perfectly intact. The horror struck me with a physical blow, a visceral punch to the gut that stole the air from my lungs. Arthur. My Arthur. If Silas was telling the truth, then Arthur, the man I had loved for 45 years, had been conscious during his own collapse, conscious while the paramedics examined him, while David and Chloe fussed around. Conscious during the funeral service, hearing the pastor's eulogy, hearing my own tearful goodbyes. Conscious as he was, lowered into that cold, dark earth, alive and utterly, terrifyingly helpless. The image was too horrific to bear, a scream rising in my throat that I swallowed back, a painful, burning lump. My Sarah and Emma, Silas continued, his voice a low rumble of pain. They were cremated. Within days, Michael pushed for it, citing hygiene and religious beliefs. He destroyed all the evidence, of course. But I knew my wife. There was something in her eyes, even in death, that haunted me. I knew it wasn't natural. He paused, taking a shaky breath. I lost everything. My job, my home, my mind. For a while. But I became obsessed. Obsessed with understanding this poison. Obsessed with finding every case, every report, every whisper of similar deaths. He explained how he had recognized Arthur's case. Your description in the local paper, Eleanor. The sudden collapse, the reported heart attack, the rapid cessation of breathing, the paramedic's notes you mentioned to a reporter about blue fingernails, a subtle sign of oxygen deprivation during severe paralysis. It was all there, exactly like Sarah and Emma. And then he laid bare the patterns, connecting the threads of suspicion that had snagged in my own mind. And then I saw the way your son and daughter-in-law behaved at the cemetery. The same control. The insistence on a closed casket. The rushed burial. The way they kept you, the primary next of kin, away from the body, from any opportunity to truly examine him yourself. His voice was heavy with the weight of experience. It mirrored my own tragedy, almost perfectly. But why? I whispered, the word a fragile breath. Why would David do this to his own father? The question hung in the air, monstrous and unthinkable. Silas's response was chilling in its bluntness. In my experience, Eleanor, it's always about money. Always. I swallowed hard, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying precision. Arthur's estate. It's nearly $800,000. Investments, savings, everything was left to me. And David has been so eager to help me manage it, even offered to take power of attorney. The words felt foreign and vile in my mouth, betraying the son I had loved, the daughter-in-law I had welcomed. Silas's next question, delivered with a quiet, grim certainty, twisted the knife deeper into my already bleeding heart. And if you, Eleanor, were to die soon after your husband, perhaps of grief, perhaps an accident, where would that $800,000 go then? The monstrous implications settled over me like a shroud. I was meant to die. Of grief, yes. A broken heart. A natural consequence of losing my beloved Arthur. No one would question it. David would inherit everything. A perfect, unquestioned crime. My own son, my flesh and blood, was planning my death. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My son, my own flesh and blood, was a murderer. A cold-blooded, calculating murderer. And I was next. The realization solidified into a grim, unshakable certainty, but with that certainty came a fierce, primal surge of defiance. Grief, fear, anger. They all coalesced into a laser-focused resolve. How much time do we have? My voice was barely audible, a fragile whisper against the enormity of the truth, but it held a steely edge. Silas's response was immediate, his tone grave. Tetrodotoxin typically wears off in 12 to 24 hours. However, Arthur is buried. Even if the toxin is wearing off, he's rapidly running out of oxygen in that sealed casket. Every minute counts, Eleanor. Every single minute brings him closer to permanent death. If we're going to save him, we have to act tonight. And we have to be very, very careful. I looked around the familiar living room, the space that had witnessed so much joy, so many arguments, so much life. Now, it felt like a stage set for a nightmare. The photographs of David as a boy, smiling innocently, playing with his father, mocked me from the mantelpiece. The unfathomable truth settled heavily in my soul. The child I had nurtured, the son I had raised, had tried to murder Arthur and was meticulously planning my own demise. The comprehension was a physical ache, a rending of the very fabric of my being. "What do we do?" I asked, surprised by the sudden strength and clarity in my voice. There was no room for doubt, no space for hesitation. Arthur was alive, and I would move heaven and earth to save him. How do we save Arthur? Silas understood. He didn't offer false reassurances. We need help, Eleanor. And we need to be swift. This isn't something we can do alone. The next few hours passed in a surreal blur of frantic planning and hushed phone calls. At precisely 9:47 p.m., a soft knock echoed at my back door. I opened it to find Silas Blackwood standing there, looking worn and disheveled from his day, yet his eyes were sharp and alert. He carried a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, its contents a mystery. They were suspicious, he said, stepping inside. David and Chloe. They circled the block twice before they finally drove off. They're watching you, Eleanor. Be careful. His words were a stark reminder of the danger lurking just outside. My hands trembled as I poured him a cup of coffee, the aroma momentarily distracting me from the escalating tension. "What's the plan, Silas?" I asked, my voice still a little shaky, but my resolve firm. He took a sip of the coffee, his gaze sweeping around the living room, taking in the evidence of a life now fractured. "We have to exhume him, Eleanor." From his casket, the words hung in the air, audacious and horrifying. "Exhume?" I repeated, my mind struggling to grasp the enormity of it. "Yes," he confirmed. "Most modern burial vaults aren't sealed with concrete until the following day. That gives us a window of opportunity. It's risky, highly illegal, but it's our only chance." He looked at me, his eyes unwavering. "We're essentially committing grave desecration, which is a felony. If we're caught, we'll both go to prison." A cold, hard laugh escaped my lips. "Prison? Silas, if Arthur is in that box, alive, I don't care about prison. My husband needs me." My resolve was absolute. The thought of Arthur, conscious and gasping for air in that dark coffin, obliterated any fear of legal repercussions. He nodded slowly, a grim acknowledgement of my determination. "Even if we find him alive, Eleanor, the high dose of the toxin will leave him severely compromised. He'll need immediate, discreet medical attention." He paused, his expression serious. "We can't just take a man declared dead to an emergency room. That would instantly involve the police, the medical examiner, and it would give David and Chloe all the time they need to fabricate explanations, to turn this against us." My heart sank. He was right. We couldn't trust anyone else. But who? Silas seemed to read my thoughts. "I have a trusted ally. My sister-in-law, Dr. Lena Torres. She's an ER physician at St. Mary's Hospital. She's one of the few people who believed me about Sarah and Emma. She helped me during my darkest days, even when no one else would." His voice was tinged with gratitude and a deep sense of loyalty. "She's willing to help, but she needs confirmation. We need to bring Arthur to her, quietly, before anyone else knows." He reiterated the immense risk, not just of prison, but of something far more personal. "Eleanor, if Arthur is truly dead, if this is a delusion, you will have irrevocably destroyed your relationship with your son. You will have broken the law for nothing." I looked at the framed photograph of Arthur and me, smiling on our 40th wedding anniversary, then to the one of David, a strapping young man, graduating college. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but the anger now overshadowed it. "My relationship with my son is already destroyed, Silas," I stated quietly, the truth settling deep within me. I just didn't know it until today. There was no turning back, only forward. To Arthur, if you're gripped by this story, remember to like, share, and subscribe to follow Eleanor's unbelievable journey to save her husband. Let's get back to the darkness of Riverside Cemetery. Silas nodded grimly, his jaw set. "We need to move now. The cemetery has night security, but there's typically a 90-minute window between their rounds. If we time this right, we might just get him out before the next patrol." His words were calm, precise, a stark contrast to the hurricane of emotions raging within me. We drove to Riverside Cemetery in my old, sensible sedan, the engine a low purr in the silent night. Silas crouched low in the passenger seat, a dark silhouette, his presence a secret shared only by us and the vast, empty road. The night was our accomplice, overcast, moonless, a blanket of oppressive darkness that swallowed the familiar landscape, transforming it into something ominous and otherworldly. For me, it amplified the nightmare-like atmosphere, making every shadow seem to writhe, every rustle of leaves sound like a whispered warning. Arthur's grave, in a newer section of the cemetery, was easy to find. It was marked by a temporary headstone, a simple plaque with his name and dates, and the earth around it was still freshly disturbed, a dark, raw rectangle against the manicured green. The sight sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, confirming the chilling reality that beneath this patch of earth lay my husband, perhaps still alive. Silas had come prepared. From his duffel bag, he pulled out a small, sturdy shovel and a long, thin metal probe. "We can't just start digging haphazardly," he explained, his voice hushed. "We need to locate the exact position of the casket without moving too much earth. A probing rod helps us do that, without drawing too much attention." He started methodically, pushing the probe into the soft earth, feeling for resistance. While 6 feet is traditional, most modern burial vaults are only about 4 feet deep, he murmured, more to himself than to me, as he worked. The only sounds were the soft scrape of the probe, the distant hoot of an owl, and the frantic beating of my own heart. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, with a sudden, chilling thunk, the probe hit something solid. Both Silas and I froze, our breath held captive in the cold night air. "That's the vault," Silas confirmed, his voice barely a whisper, a mix of relief and grim determination. For the next hour, we worked in exhausting, desperate shifts. The shovel was surprisingly heavy, the earth resistant and clumpy. My hands, unaccustomed to such labor, quickly became sore, then blistered. But the pain was a distant echo compared to the immense emotional weight of our task. Every shovelful of dirt was a frantic prayer, a plea for Arthur's life. My thoughts were consumed by him, his unwavering support through 3 miscarriages, his quiet strength, his dedication, the 45 years of shared jokes, silent understanding, and profound love. He was more than a husband. He was my anchor, my other half. I couldn't lose him like this. Not like this. Silas, sensing my increasing desperation, offered a brief explanation. "Modern burial vaults are designed to protect the casket from the earth's weight and moisture. They have removable lids, usually reinforced concrete, that sit over the casket itself." His words were meant to reassure, to provide a shred of logic in this insane situation. But the image of Arthur trapped beneath all that concrete was still horrifying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we had cleared enough dirt. The concrete lid of the burial vault, with its heavy metal lifting hardware, became visible, a dark, rectangular slab in the dim light. It was enormous, daunting. "This is it," Silas said, wiping a streak of mud and sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His eyes met mine, intense and serious. "Once we open this, Eleanor, there's no going back. We are committing fully. Open it," I commanded, my voice firm, unwavering. There was no hesitation, no doubt. This was Arthur's only chance, and I would take it, whatever the cost. Silas nodded, then pulled a crowbar from his duffel bag. With a grunt of effort, he inserted the tool under the edge of the heavy concrete lid and heaved. The sound of stone grinding against stone was sickeningly loud in the still night. Slowly, agonizingly, the lid began to lift, creating a narrow gap, and then it hit me. A familiar, sickeningly sweet, medicinal odor, the same strange scent I had noticed in my bedroom 2 weeks ago, assaulted my senses. It wasn't the smell of damp earth or decay. It was a chemical, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. My suspicions, once a terrifying whisper, now screamed their confirmation. This was it. This was the proof. The lid, finally dislodged, was carefully tilted to one side. Below us, pristine and untouched by the surrounding earth, lay Arthur's mahogany casket. It looked exactly as it had at the funeral. An elegant, solemn vessel. Silas, without hesitation, climbed into the shallow vault, careful not to disturb the earth around the casket. He knelt beside it, running his hands along its polished surface. He leaned in close, examining the sides, his head tilted. Then, with a sudden, sharp intake of breath, he looked up at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and confirmation. "Eleanor?" he urgently called up, his voice barely controlled. "The casket has been modified. There are small air holes drilled in the sides near the head." "Air holes?" My legs nearly gave out, the strength draining from them, replaced by a surge of adrenaline so potent it made my vision blur. This wasn't just a cold calculation. It was a macabre, monstrous plan. They intended for him to slowly suffocate, to experience the terror of his own living entombment. The thought was unbearable. "Oh my God," I gasped, climbing into the shallow vault beside Silas, my movements clumsy with terror and urgency. "Help me get this open." Now, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the cemetery. We worked together, our hands fumbling with the intricate latches and clasps of the casket. Each click, each release, was a small victory, a step closer to the truth, a step closer to Arthur. The metallic tang of fear filled my mouth, mingling with the sweet, medicinal odor emanating from the casket. Silas looked at me, his face grim but resolute. "Are you ready, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice low, a final warning before the precipice. I nodded, unable to speak, my eyes fixed on the gleaming wood of the casket lid. With a final, straining heave, Silas lifted the lid. It swung open with a soft sigh, revealing Arthur. He lay there, exactly as he had at the viewing, his skin pale, a faint bluish tinge around his lips, his hands folded peacefully over his chest. For a terrifying moment, he looked utterly, undeniably dead. Silas didn't hesitate. He immediately leaned forward, placing his ear against Arthur's chest, his own body tense with anticipation. I watched, my breath held captive, my gaze glued to Arthur's chest. And then I saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible rising and falling. A shallow, fragile movement that was barely there, yet undeniable. "He's alive," Silas whispered, his voice thick with stunned disbelief. A profound awe mingled with the terror of their discovery. "Jesus Christ, he's actually alive." The words were a torrent of relief and horror, washing over me in a dizzying wave. My husband, my Arthur, was alive. After 2 weeks. After being declared dead. After his own funeral, his eyes remained closed, showing no response, no flicker of recognition, but the faint, rhythmic movement of his breathing was present, a fragile testament to his stubborn hold on life. Silas swiftly checked Arthur's wrist for a pulse, then placed a hand over his mouth and nose, confirming the faint breaths. "The poison is definitely wearing off," he murmured, his voice now urgent, decisive. "But his oxygen levels are critically low. He needs immediate medical attention, Eleanor. We have to get him out of here, now." We began to carefully, gently, lift Arthur from the casket, his body still heavy, unresponsive. It was a painstaking process, requiring both of our strengths and a delicate touch. But just as we were carefully maneuvering him, a sound, sharp and intrusive, shattered the fragile silence of the cemetery. The distinct thud-thud of car doors slamming shut, followed by the faint, muffled murmur of distant voices, carried clearly across the still night air. My blood ran cold. "Someone's coming," I whispered, my heart hammering with a renewed, primal terror. The euphoria of finding Arthur alive instantly evaporated, replaced by the chilling dread of discovery. Silas peered over the edge of the grave, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the disturbed earth. His face hardened. "2 people," he confirmed, his voice low and urgent. "With flashlights. They're heading this way. We need to move now." But moving Arthur quickly enough, discreetly enough, to avoid discovery, was impossible. He was a dead weight, unconscious, his breathing still shallow and weak. We couldn't just drag him out into the open. We were trapped. As the voices grew closer, louder, more distinct, a cold dread coiled in my stomach. I recognized them. With a chilling, sickening certainty, I recognized them. "Mom?" David's voice echoed through the cemetery, closer now, cutting through the night. "Mom, are you out here? We saw your car in the parking lot." His words, meant to sound concerned, were laced with an undercurrent of something darker, something predatory. And then I heard Chloe's syrupy voice, just behind him, a mocking echo. Eleanor and Silas, with Arthur's barely breathing body, were trapped in the open grave, surrounded by the very people who had put him there. The full horror of the situation crashed down on me. There was no escape. The metallic clang of car doors echoed through the cemetery, followed by the increasingly clear voices. I could distinctly hear Chloe, her voice hushed but agitated, talking on her phone, likely calling for backup, or worse, the police. The net was closing in. Silas looked at me, his face grim, illuminated by the faint glow of his phone, which he was discreetly holding. "Whatever happens next, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "Remember that we found him alive. That's the truth." A surge of newfound strength, fueled by the undeniable truth of Arthur's survival, coursed through me. "Then we fight," I whispered back, my resolve hardening into steel. As David's flashlight beam swept closer, casting dancing shadows amongst the gravestones, my mind raced. Chloe. Her image, her obsession with being seen as perfect, as virtuous, as a pillar of the community. It was her greatest vulnerability. I leaned in, whispering to Silas, "Chloe? She's terrified of being seen as anything less than perfect. If we can make her lose control in front of witnesses, expose their lies now." Silas's brow furrowed. "Witnesses?" "Chloe just called someone," I clarified, my eyes scanning the approaching lights. "Police, security, someone will be here soon. We have maybe 10 minutes to turn this around. To save Arthur, to expose them." It was a terrifying decision, a gamble with stakes beyond comprehension. But what choice did we have? Arthur was barely breathing, trapped. We couldn't escape, but we could confront. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of courage I possessed. Slowly, I straightened up in the grave, then called out, my voice clear and surprisingly steady in the night. "David! I'm over here!" The flashlight beam, which had been sweeping haphazardly, instantly swung towards me, blinding me for a moment in its harsh glare. David and Chloe rushed forward, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Their faces, caught in the harsh beam of the flashlight, shifted from feigned concern to shock, then to a dark, calculating determination as they saw the open grave, the displaced earth, and Arthur's casket. "Oh my God!" Chloe gasped, her voice shrill, a perfect imitation of distress. "Eleanor, what have you done?" I looked at her, then at David, my gaze unwavering. "I found him," I stated, my voice stronger than I felt, though it trembled slightly. With Silas's steadying hand, I climbed out of the grave, standing on the edge, illuminated by their flashlights. "I found Arthur. And he's alive." David's face went from pale to ghostly white. His mouth opened and closed, no sound escaping for a moment. Then, his voice chillingly low, he asked, "How did you know?" The question hung in the air, a final, irrefutable confirmation of their guilt. He hadn't asked if he was alive, but how I knew. I gestured to Silas, who stood calmly beside me, his presence a beacon of quiet strength. "Dr. Blackwood recognized the symptoms," I explained, "from his own family's tragedy. He knew what you did, David. What you both did." Chloe, recovering quickly, her face contorted with fury, frantically pulled out her phone again. "I'm calling the police! You're both under arrest for grave desecration. You'll go to prison for this." Silas, ever calm, stepped forward slightly. "And when the police arrive, Chloe," he said, his voice even, "how will you explain the air holes drilled into the sides of Arthur's casket? How will you explain the rushed burial? Or your eagerness to manage Eleanor's finances so soon after Arthur's supposed death?" David, ignoring Chloe's frantic babbling, stared down into the grave at Arthur's unconscious form. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed, devoid of any remorse, only cold, hard calculation. "This complicates things," he muttered, almost to himself. The casual cruelty of his words, his complete lack of concern for his father's life, twisted a knife in my heart. "David," I confronted him, my voice breaking slightly but my eyes blazing with righteous anger. "He's your father. How could you do this to him? How could you do this to me?" He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and a bitter, resentful edge entered his voice. "Because I've been watching you and Dad live your comfortable little life. he sneered, while Chloe and I struggle, barely making ends meet. Despite everything, we decided to take what should have been ours anyway. As he spoke, the distinct wail of sirens grew louder, closer, echoing through the peaceful cemetery. Help was on its way. It was then that Silas revealed his trump card. "And, just so you know," he said, holding up his phone, "I've been recording this entire conversation, every word, and it's already been uploaded to a secure server." David's eyes widened in dawning horror. With a guttural roar, he lunged for Silas, a desperate, animalistic cry of fury and defeat. But Silas, surprisingly agile, deftly avoided him, throwing his phone into the darkness of the cemetery, its purpose already served. Silas then turned to a now panicking Chloe, who was frantically protesting that the recording was illegal. "Under this state's one-party consent law, Chloe," he stated calmly, "it's perfectly admissible. Every admission, every confession, every word, documented." The first police cruisers pulled into the cemetery, their flashing blue and red lights painting the gravestones in an eerie, surreal glow. Headlights swept across the scene, illuminating the open grave, the two figures standing beside it, and the one lying still within. I knelt beside Arthur, reaching into the grave, taking his cold hand in mine. "Arthur," I whispered, my voice choked with tears and overwhelming relief. "Can you hear me? It's Eleanor. You're safe now." Incredibly, miraculously, Arthur's eyes fluttered open. For a brief moment, they met mine, a flicker of recognition, a spark of awareness, before they drifted closed again. It was a fleeting, yet undeniable, moment. A moment witnessed not just by me and Silas, but by David and Chloe, whose faces now bore the chilling realization of their absolute failure. The police officers, guns drawn, descended upon us. I squeezed Arthur's hand, and I felt it, a weak, but unmistakable squeeze back. The next 72 hours blurred into an exhausting, emotional maelstrom of hospital corridors, sterile waiting rooms, and intense police interviews. Arthur rushed to St. Mary's under the discreet care of Dr. Lena Torres, was immediately placed on advanced life support. The medical tests confirmed Silas's terrifying hypothesis. Arthur's system showed traces of tetrodotoxin. Dr. Torres's expertise, born from her own painful past and belief in Silas, proved crucial in guiding his specialized treatment. Arthur was alive, but the 2 weeks of severe oxygen deprivation had taken a devastating toll. His recovery would be agonizingly slow, and the doctors cautioned me about potential permanent cognitive damage. He lay in a medically induced coma, his breathing assisted, his body hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires. He was no longer buried, but he was still trapped, albeit in a different kind of prison. Silas's recorded confession from David and Chloe, coupled with the shocking discovery of the air-hold casket and Arthur's miraculously revived state, provided sufficient, irrefutable evidence. The district attorney swiftly filed charges against them: attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Detective Evelyn Reed, a meticulous and sharp-eyed officer, took the lead in the investigation. She was a woman of quiet intensity, her gaze missing nothing. She delved deep into David and Chloe's finances, unearthing a shocking tapestry of deceit and desperation. Over the past 2 years, they had accumulated nearly $300,000 in credit card debt. Designer clothes, luxury cars, exotic vacations, their lifestyle, meant to project an image of effortless success, was utterly unsustainable. Detective Reed confirmed their motive with chilling clarity. "It was a calculated decision, Mrs. Vance," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of judgment, simply stating the facts. Based on pure greed, they planned to clear their debts with Arthur's $800,000 estate, and then, if you were to pass away naturally soon after, they would have also collected on your life insurance policy. The words left me hollow, not satisfied. There was no triumph, no sense of vindication. Only a profound, devastating emptiness. My only child, the boy I had raised with such love and hope, was a calculated murderer. The realization was a weight that pressed down on my chest, threatening to crush me. Silas, however, seemed to breathe new life. A few days after Arthur was stabilized, he visited the hospital, no longer disheveled. Dr. Torres had, with her characteristic kindness, helped him procure some cleaner, more appropriate clothes. He looked younger, the haunted edges of his face softened, a spark returning to his startling blue eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said quietly, sitting beside me in the waiting room. "Helping you. You've given me a reason to keep fighting." He then leaned in, his voice dropping, a new glint in his eye that I couldn't quite decipher. "There's something else you should know. A deeper layer of their betrayal." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Chloe. She wasn't just in it for David." My brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Chloe," he revealed, a slight smirk playing on his lips, "has been having an affair with none other than Dr. Richard Stone." My breath hitched. Dr. Stone. The very doctor who had signed Arthur's death certificate. The man who had confirmed his supposed heart attack. A chill, far colder than the March wind, swept through me. Silas produced a small, discreet flash drive. I did a little digging. After everything came out. Called in a few old favors. It appears Chloe wasn't planning on staying with David once they secured the inheritance. She has been seeing Dr. Stone for months. I have photographs, hotel receipts, and incriminating text messages. She planned to leave David, taking her cut of the money, and presumably live a new life with the doctor. The layers of deceit were staggering, each one more shocking than the last. But Silas wasn't finished, and it goes deeper still, he continued, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. Neither David nor Chloe were entirely honest with each other about the full extent of their individual debts. Chloe, it turns out, had accumulated $75,000 in online poker losses, and David had secretly borrowed from some very unsavory loan sharks. Debts he never disclosed to Chloe. He looked at me, his gaze intense. "They betrayed you, Eleanor. They betrayed Arthur in the most heinous way imaginable, but they also fundamentally betrayed each other, driven by their own separate greed and self-interest." He then proposed a plan, a subtle, insidious vengeance that bypassed the legal system, aiming for a different kind of justice. "We can't undo what they did, but we can make sure they experience a fraction of the profound betrayal they inflicted on you and Arthur." What if we were to subtly disseminate this information? Let David know about Chloe and Dr. Stone. Let Chloe know about David's secret debts and the loan sharks he's entangled with. Let them experience the true depth of their own mutual deceit, not just the legal consequences. A grim smile touched my lips. It wouldn't bring back Arthur's health, or erase the pain, but it would be a form of poetic justice. The strategic information sharing campaign Eleanor and Silas orchestrated was subtle, yet devastatingly effective. Anonymous tips, carefully planted seeds of truth, began to sprout in the most unexpected places. It started with Dr. Richard Stone. Following an anonymous call to the police, his name was flagged, and his involvement in signing Arthur's questionable death certificate came under scrutiny. Cornered, and with his career on the line, Stone quickly revealed his affair with Chloe, hoping to reduce his own charges. The bombshell hit David's legal team like a ton of bricks. His lawyer, seeking to portray Chloe as a manipulative force, informed David of her infidelity, suggesting it could be used to undermine her credibility. Similarly, Silas, leveraging his network and a few more anonymous drops, ensured that the financial records detailing Chloe's significant online poker losses and David's secret, high-interest loans from unsavory figures reached both defense attorneys. The revelations detonated their already fragile alliance. Their relationship imploded spectacularly. A brutal unraveling played out in pretrial hearings and tense attorney meetings. They fired their shared attorney, hired separate counsel, and quickly began testifying against each other, each seeking to shift blame and secure a lighter sentence. Chloe, ever the opportunist, painted David as the mastermind, offering her testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. David, his face a mask of bitter fury, retaliated by revealing her affair with Dr. Stone and her plans to abandon him once the inheritance was secured. From Arthur's hospital room, Eleanor watched the drama unfold on the news, a cold satisfaction settling in her heart. It wasn't the kind of joyous triumph she might have expected, but a quiet, grim acknowledgement of justice. Their mutual destruction, self-inflicted and thorough, was a fitting end to their avarice. Arthur's recovery, though slow, was nothing short of miraculous. His mind, once clouded by the toxin, gradually sharpened. There were days of confusion, periods of deep frustration, but with Eleanor's unwavering presence and the diligent care of Dr. Torres, he began to heal. One afternoon, several weeks into his recovery, as Eleanor read quietly by his bedside, he stirred. His eyes, clear and filled with warmth, met hers. "Eleanor," he said, his voice weak but distinct, speaking her name clearly for the first time since his collapse. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Reflecting on their 45 years, the good and the bad, the joy and the recent trauma, Eleanor realized something profound. She had no regrets. David and Chloe made their choices, driven by greed and a twisted sense of entitlement. They would live with the consequences of those choices, not she. 1 year later, Eleanor and Arthur lived in a charming new cottage on the outskirts of town. They had sold their old house, too filled with painful memories, embracing a fresh start. Arthur, fully recovered, his hands steady and strong, spent his days tending a vibrant garden, his movements graceful, a quiet testament to his renewed appreciation for life. The near-death experience, rather than dimming his spirit, seemed to have imbued him with an even deeper sense of purpose and joy. Silas, no longer the disheveled stranger, had found his own new beginning. Now a respected consultant for various police departments, he lived in a cozy apartment above their garage. He had become part of their chosen family, the son who had, quite literally, saved them. The legal proceedings concluded, swift and decisive. David received a sentence of 28 years in prison. Chloe, 22. Their appeals were denied, their future bleak. Dr. Richard Stone, his medical license revoked, received 15 years for his complicity. Their perfect, fabricated lives were utterly destroyed by their greed. Their sprawling house was foreclosed, their luxury car repossessed, and they would remain bankrupt for decades. Eleanor and Arthur, after much discussion, decided to use the $850,000 windfall from Arthur's life insurance policy. An ironic twist, given their original intentions, to establish the Second Chance Foundation. The foundation aimed to help victims of family fraud and elder abuse, providing legal aid, housing assistance, and psychological support for those rebuilding their lives after similar betrayals. Silas, naturally, became the director of victim services, dedicating his life to ensuring others found the justice he had been denied. And in a beautiful, heartwarming turn, he began dating Dr. Lena Torres, bringing immense joy to Eleanor and Arthur, who saw in their burgeoning relationship a symbol of hope and healing. On the anniversary of Arthur's death, they gathered in their sunlit garden, surrounded by the vibrant blooms Arthur had cultivated. It wasn't a day of mourning, but a celebration of survival, of chosen family, of resilience. Arthur raised his glass, his eyes twinkling. "To second chances," he toasted, his voice clear and strong. "To the family we choose, and to the love that survives everything." Eleanor and Silas shared a knowing look, remembering the terrible night in the cemetery, two strangers united by a desperate hope. Having saved not just Arthur's life, but each other's, Eleanor smiled, a deep, profound peace settling in her heart. While some stories ended with revenge or justice, the best ones, she realized, ended with peace, and that, after everything, was more precious than any inheritance.